Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cindy Maka, and I'm the director of the Western Museum of Flight. And I am proud to present today, in fact, I'm privileged, to have someone who is not only a legacy to the pioneering Tuskegee Airmen, but also an accomplished pilot in his own right. And today he's going to talk about a subject of interest to all of us. So ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce to you Brad Lang.
Now, personally, I grew up in West Orange, New Jersey. I'm the son of civil servants. My father worked during the day at the Housing Authority in Newark, New Jersey, and at night he worked at the post office. My mother was the supervisor of social workers at the Board of Education in New Jersey. Now, my parents always said to my brother Wayne and myself, do something that's productive and also try to help others. So part of the way I try to make a difference is sharing some of the experiences I've had, not just with my father's group, Tuskegee Airmen, but also as an aviator in general. And I think you'll find from this lecture you may learn something about the Red Tail Project and Tuskegee that you didn't know before. I want to frame this discussion, as Craig will show the slides, with what it was like to be a black American back in the 30s and 40s. And it was an extremely hostile environment. And you have to remember what it's like to remember living under Jim Crow. And for those of you who are too young to understand what Jim Crow is or was, Jim Crow laws were state and federal laws that sanctioned separate and unequal treatment of black Americans in the U.S. Now, if you can imagine living as a black person in the 30s and 40s, you could shop at a store, but you couldn't sit down at the lunch counter. You could ride a train, but only in a section behind the actual train itself, the engine, or in a colored section only part of the train. If you walked around, you want to get a drink of water, you have to drink out of the colored water fountain. And if you're going to a movie, you're relegated to sitting in the balcony. Now, if you want to sit in the balcony, that's okay, but sometimes you want to sit down front and watch the movie up close. But you didn't have these options. And this is the social environment that the Tuskegee Airmen grew up in. And later on, when we went to war, most of these guys were patriots just like Mike was, and they wanted to fight for their country. So they decided to either volunteer, like some of their friends did. My father volunteered because his friend got into the Army Air Corps as well. But when you go down, basically, you're relegated to being a cook, a laborer, or a servant. So the airmen really fought 2 wars in total, and the war is bigotry and prejudice at home, and overseas, fascism and Nazism. So, you know, when you hear the airmen talk about 2 victories, double V, it was one for fighting at home and one for going overseas and fighting Hitler. Now, the military in 1925 had a entity, a department called the Army War College, and they produced a report entitled The Use of Negro Manpower in War, which stated that blacks were inferior human beings, not trustworthy, and incapable of going into combat. Now, somewhere along the line, the War College forgot that blacks had volunteered in every major war or conflict, including the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War with the Buffalo Soldiers, Indian Wars, and over 370,000 blacks participated in World War I. But somehow that was lost when the reports came out in 1925, which basically tempered how the black American as a combat soldier would be looked at, and this is a part of the tone that we're setting for the Tuskegee Airmen and what they had to overcome. So when flying came about in terms of participating in World War II, to be a combat fighter pilot was not an option. But there was intense pressure by the black press and the public to have black pilots. I mean, everybody's paying taxes. You see all the white pilots going over there, or people who are cadets to fly. Why can't I do this too? Even for a country that is not accepting of me in general. Now, the experiment at Tuskegee, and we're going to call that the Tuskegee experiment for right now, was designed to prove that blacks could not fly. It wasn't actually designed to say that they could fly. They wanted to basically support the military and say, listen, the report says that basically they don't have the intellect. Let's just prove it. Now, they didn't pick a spot in New Jersey, which is where I'm from. They didn't pick a spot in Northern California. They picked a spot in one of the most hostile areas or regions of the country, Tuskegee, Alabama. But in Tuskegee, you already had a university down there, Tuskegee University, and there was a flight school in the civilian pilot program being run by Chief Anderson. Now, Tuskegee, Alabama was the initial training point for the military guys, and somewhere along the lines, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt had heard that blacks were trained to fly at Tuskegee, and from what I gather from guys who actually saw her and heard of her, they said she was very strong-willed, and the president basically let her do what she wanted to do. She went down to Tuskegee, and she saw a segregated base, and she saw blacks flying, and she got in touch with the instructor down there, the lead pilot, Chief Anderson, and she said, hey, would you mind taking me for a ride? I heard they said that blacks couldn't fly, and would you mind taking me for a ride? Chief Anderson said, sure, that's what I do. So she hopped in the airplane, much to the chagrin of the Secret Service agents who said, don't go. You can't go with that guy. You know, something bad is going to happen to you. She rode around the pass just like we all do here at the airport. She got out of it and she goes, I don't know what they're talking about. That was a pretty good ride to me. I should probably say something to my husband. And Chief Anderson was like, oh, I'm glad you enjoyed the ride. So I'm very sure that Eleanor went back and said, honey, these guys are getting a terrible reputation down there for not being able to fly, and I flew with Chief Anderson. It was a fine flight. We should probably support them in what they're trying to do down there and become a military fighting group. And so that being said, Franklin D. Roosevelt was helpful in supporting the airmen as they began their task of training, and the tone was set for the training at Tuskegee. Now, at this point, we're going to do a couple of things. Craig Huntley's going to come up and introduce himself, and we're going to show you some slides from the 1940s. And as an aviation, and I say this with tongue-in-cheek, as a nerd, I think I've seen every, or at least I used to think, until I met Craig, that I've seen all the slides and photos in all the books. But Craig has some color slides that he will show you that are actually not enhanced, but actually from the day. And it will show you the base, it will show you some of the maps and some of the personnel and aircraft and the events that were going on in Tuskegee back in the 40s. And when we typically think of Tuskegee Airmen, normally you think of just the fighter pilots. I got a scolding one time by Craig's uncle, who was the crew chief for Skipper's Darling, and he said to me, Brad, you know that without us, the pilots would never leave the airport or leave the base. So remember that to support one pilot, basically it takes about 10 people. And there would be no fighter pilot without a great crew chief and the support staff that goes into that. Just like you can't have a winning quarterback without a great line, or a winning team without a great line on a football squad. So the term Tuskegee is a broad term which incorporates those who worked administration, those who were nurses, those who were mechanics, those who were supply officers. It's a broad group. And this group is dying at about one a week. I think last night, Rusty Burns, a fighter pilot with Tuskegee, said to me that there are roughly 108 pilots left. The support personnel, maybe a few hundred. But these legacies from World War II, the greatest generation, are dying as all of the greatest generation are passing away. And we need to continually remind others of their great histories and the history of this country. This is Dad's cadet class. He was a master sergeant. He enlisted in '42, and there were no spots for blacks. Basically, they moved him from base to base, and he started flight training, and he was not successful, but he started in '45 of January. He worked with Noel Parrish, who was the white base commander that all the guys really enjoyed and who stuck up for the airmen. And the aircraft in the picture is a PT-17, which is one of the types that my father had a chance to fly. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Craig Huntley.
My name is Craig Huntley, and I'm the historian for the Los Angeles chapter of Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. I'm honored to be here to give you this lecture and to show you this slideshow. Okay, the slideshow consists of photographs from my personal collection, as well as some rare Kodachrome slides that I received from my uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Holloman. Without him taking these slides, I wouldn't be able to present some of these slides to you today. Just to give you a little background about myself, I was born and raised here in the Southland. I grew up right up under 2-5 left, 2-5 right. I grew up watching DC-6s, DC-7s, 727s, 707s, and DC-3s coming in and out of LAX. I'm an airplane nut, and I'm a warbird nerd. Okay, what can I say? Brad alluded to the fact that I have an uncle who's actually my father's eldest living brother. He's an original Tuskegee Airman. He served with the 332nd Fighter Group, 100 Fighter Squadron, from the very beginning all the way to the end of the war. Came back home October 1945. He still lives here in Los Angeles. He still gets up every day at 3 in the morning and goes to work. I don't know how he does it. I'm 48 years old and I'm ready to quit working. So I don't know how he's doing it, but some more background about myself. I'm a 26-year active duty Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer. Brad left off with Eleanor Roosevelt, and exactly where I'm going to pick up at. This here is the flight that started it all. What you see here is Chief Anderson in the cockpit, who was the chief flight instructor at Tuskegee Institute at the time, the CPT program, and Lewis Jackson, who was the overall director of training. Eleanor flew for about an hour. That's a J-3 Piper Club. They took off out of Moulton Field. I want you to understand that there are two actual airfields at Tuskegee, Alabama. The first one is Moulton Field, which actually belonged to the Institute. And that's where the Tuskegee Airmen received their primary training in either the PT-17, PT-13, or the PT-22. And that's where this flight originated from. The second field is Tuskegee Army Airfield, which is located about 7 miles away. That's an Army Air Force field staffed by nothing but military personnel, and that's where the Tuskegee Airmen received their basic and advanced flight training. Eleanor here flew about 45 minutes to an hour with Chief Anderson. They went all the way down to Birmingham, and I'm not sure if they did any aerobatics in that J-3, but I'm pretty certain he did something pretty good to win her over to go back and talk to her husband. Just to give you an idea where actually Tuskegee is located, this here is a sectional from that period. Tuskegee is located actually 99 miles northwest of Birmingham and 119 miles northeast of Atlanta. Okay, airfield site plan, Tuskegee Army Airfield. Tuskegee Army Airfield was built in 1941. It was built by a black architectural company. Consisted of 4 runways, concrete, longest runway being 5,200 feet. This here is a Kodachrome, a 1944 shot of Tuskegee Army Airfield. Aircraft that operated out of this field, T-13s, PT-17s for primary training, or somebody who was in primary, that was part of their cross-country stop. BT-13s for basic training, AT-6s for advanced training, and also P-40s for fighter transition. In 1944, B-25, actually before the B-25s, you had AT-10s, were used for advanced twin-engine training, and the B-25Js were used. The Tuskegee Airmen received their initial primary flight training right there in the PT-17. They also utilized the PT-19. It's a low-wing monoplane, and it had a lot of characteristics that were similar to the fighter aircraft they were later going to fly. Once they had mastered the primary training phase, they moved up to basic. They moved up to the BT-13, and you can look at the BT-13 and tell that's a big step from the Stearman. We're talking about flaps, variable pitch propeller, modern radios, closed cockpit. Here they received their basic formation flying, a little bit more advanced aerobatic flying, and probably had some overall good fun in that. Here's a restored BT-13, which Wilbur Owens has one parked on a ramp. You'll be able to see one up close. What you have here is a Kodachrome slide of an actual Tuskegee AT-6. This particular model here is a instrument trainer. The pilot or the trainee, the cadet, would actually be in the back seat underneath the hood, basically, and taking his instrument flight training. Okay, the AT-6, another big step up, 600 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, okay, used for advanced training, cross-country flights, aerobatics. It can also house a 30 caliber machine gun, and that's where the Tuskegee Airmen started receiving some of their basic and initial gunnery training with. What we have here is the first class to graduate from Tuskegee Army Airfield. Consisted of 5 cadets. From left to right, you have Lemuel Custis and Charles DeBow. Upper right, you have Mac Ross, Spanky Roberts, and on the left, you have Captain B.O. Davis, Jr. And I could talk maybe a good hour on him by himself, but just to give you a quick synopsis, B.O. Davis, Jr. is the son of a career Army officer, General B.O. Davis, Sr. He was already a captain in United States Infantry. He attended West Point Military Academy, graduated in class 1936, 37 out of 167 cadets. During the course of 4 years at West Point, he was silenced. Nobody would talk to him other than in the course of his academic studies or as a lesson. So he had to have been pretty intelligent and pretty determined to succeed and endure that. He later became the commander of the 99 Fighter Squadron, the commander of the 332nd Fighter Group, as well as the first black military officer to command a base here in the United States. Another shot of an AT-6. I always ask Brad, when is he going to paint his AT-6 in some Tuskegee colors? And he tells me, it just costs too much. I'm going to tell you, the only paint on that airplane I see is the anti-glare panel is olive drab and the numbers. I know you can handle that, Brad. Okay, the classes started, as you can remember, the first class was 5 classes. This here is class 44H. This class graduated September 8th, 1944. So as time went on, the classes grew. There was a quota system, and there was still a quota system in place. This class here started with 85 members. This is what graduated. Okay? Not all cadets were eliminated because they could not fly. Okay? There was a quota system in place. With this particular class here, 6 of these members here were killed overseas in combat. 1 other individual was killed here in the States with a mid-air collision with a B-24. And quite naturally, he got blamed for the mid-air collision. This here is the picture of the 99 Fighter Squadron. After the first 8 classes had graduated, they comprised this one squadron, which is the 99 Fighter Squadron. Initially, it was called the 99th Pursuit Squadron. In the center, you have Lieutenant Colonel B.O. Davis, Jr., and he's sitting there right there emitting West Point, straight up and erect. These are the first members of the Tuskegee Airmen that actually went overseas, and their combat started North Africa and ended up all the way in Italy. As the 99 Fighter Squadron progressed through training and served overseas in combat, other classes were coming along. Okay, those aviation cadets moved into what was called the 332nd Fighter Group. Okay, the 332nd Fighter Group comprised, like Braddock said, mechanics, doctors, nurses, all sorts of enlisted people that could handle all sorts of occupations. Here we have some P-40s on a flight somewhere over Selfridge Field, Michigan. In October 1943, those pilots and enlisted folks who had completed their initial training were assigned to the 332nd Fighter Group, where they actually began the training to go into combat. A couple other P-40s. You notice these here are natural metal. These were taken later on. These here are Tuskegee-based P-40s. They're probably just on a high-altitude cross-country flight. What we have here is a combat shot, pretty rare, Kodachrome color, 1943. These are actual combat veterans, 99 Fighter Squadron. I'd like you to take note to the gentleman second from the left. His name is Captain Charles B. Hall. He is the first black American to actually shoot down an enemy aircraft in combat during World War II. He shot down a Focke-Wulf 190. He received a Distinguished Flying Cross for his efforts. This here is Sidney P. Brooks. This photograph was taken in 1943 in a place called Licata, Sicily. Can you look at what he's flying in? Tennis shoes, shorts, Mae West. Another shot of some P-40s right over North Africa. Here's Captain Charles B. Hall shaking hands with Major General Joe Cannon, who was commanding General 12th Air Force after his victory. Some shots of some P-40s here at Selfridge Field, Michigan, that belonged to the 332nd Fighter Group. This picture was taken December of 1943, and it was awful cold out there, as you can see by the snow and ice. Okay, the 332nd Fighter Group sailed overseas January 3rd, 1944. Their destination was unknown to them. They ended up in Italy, southern tip. They went across in 5 Liberty ships just like this. Initially, upon arriving overseas, they were assigned to the 12th Air Force, flying the P-39 Bel Air Cobra. The P-39 is a very unique aircraft, being in such, number one, tricycle landing gear. Number two, the engine was mounted behind the pilot. It looked very fast sitting on the ground, but from my understanding, it was very slow in the air. It was pretty much inadequate for fighter duty, and the Tuskegee Airmen were assigned coastal and harbor patrol missions with this aircraft. The P-47 transitioned into the P-47 Thunderbolt. What we have here, and I'm sure the Brigadier General knows, this is actually a ship from his former outfit. And I'm not sure if it was actually before or after the Tuskegee Airmen had it, because it does have a red tail. But nevertheless, they moved from the P-39 Thunderbolt, from the P-39 Air Cobra into the P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-47 is a very huge aircraft, and not really one that you would think as a fighter. Has 850 caliber machine guns, and of note, the Tuskegee Airmen sunk a German destroyer while flying one of these type of aircraft with nothing but machine gun fire. This here is a painting depicting the sinking of the destroyer in Trieste Harbor on June 25th, 1944. Just another shot of a P-47 belonging to the 332nd Fighter Group. You can see the machine guns there on the wing, crew chief up there, and in the background is a Mustang, and you can see the difference in size between those two aircraft. On the Tuskegee Airmen's second mission with the 332nd overseas with the 15th Air Force, Major Lee Rayford was wounded. And this is just a picture of him being operated on, having the flak removed from his legs. And once again, another P-47. Another shot of P-47s with the newly received P-51. Okay, of note, the Tuskegee Airmen was actually the only unit overseas that flew 4 different types of fighter aircraft during the course of the war. Starting out with the P-40, going to the P-39, to the P-47, and here they've received and transitioned into P-51 Bs and C Mustangs. The 332nd Fighter Group was assigned to the 15th Air Force, the 306 Fighter Wing. Each fighter group had its own tail colors and designation. As you can see, this is where the phrase red tails come from. Okay, you have the checkered tails, red tails, yellow tails, and the candy stripes. What we have here is Carol Woods, photo taken in July 1944. The Tuskegee Airmen really got it going good in July. They engaged the enemy on several occasions. July 18th, they shot down a number of Germans. July 12th, another large enemy battle. This is just a picture of the pilot describing what he had experienced. It's First Lieutenant Clarence D. Lucky Lester. I'm not sure where he got that nickname Lucky from, but maybe it's because he shot down 3 German aircraft in the course of 5 minutes over Memmingen Aerodrome on July 18, 1944. Nice shot here of a World War II red tail P-51D Mustang, which is what they're really famous for flying. And this here photograph pretty much tells the whole story. And this is what the Tuskegee Airmen was really all about overseas, protecting the bombers. And I'm pretty certain that pilot's in there working pretty hard, kicking rudder not to hit the guy who's taking that picture. There weren't always good days. Some guys didn't even make it off the runway. What you see here is the remnants of an aircraft collision at Ramitelli Air Base. The pilot himself was killed, and the other guy in the other plane was severely burned. Another shot of a red-tailed Mustang at base, very rare Kodachrome slide. Enlisted men, the mechanics, worked in some very harsh conditions. Job had to get done, and they were determined to do it. All pilots today, whether they served overseas with them or they served in the States, they will tell you, they will thank their crew chiefs and mechanics because they know without them, they would not probably be here today. On March 24th, 1945, the 15th Air Force staged and flew its longest mission. It was a 1,600-mile round-trip mission to Berlin, Germany. On that mission, the 332nd engaged the enemy. They encountered German Me-262 jet aircraft. 3 of the Tuskegee Airmen shot down 3 of those German jets: Roscoe Brown, Charles Brantley, and Earl Lane. Pictured here is Earl Lane. On April 1st, 1945, over Wales, Austria, the 332nd shot down 13 aircraft on another mission. Pictured here is Harry Stewart, and we'll talk about him a little bit more, but he just got back and he had shot down 3 that day. On their way home, this photograph was taken on the Liberty ship, bringing them back into New York Harbor. Okay, you heard me talk briefly about B.O. Davis Jr. and how he was the first commander of an air base here in the United States. This particular photograph shows him receiving that command. Okay, and that base is Godman Air Force Base in Kentucky, and that is where the 477th Composite Group would be stationed at. And the reason why it was a composite group is because it was made up of 2 B-25 squadrons and 2 P-47 squadrons. This is the picture of B.O. Davis Jr. and what I like to call the big wheels. These here are the head honchos for the group, and in the background is just the group's C-47. The 477 flew the B-25J, and I can't imagine what it would be like to be a 19, 20-year-old kicking and running the B-25, but it certainly had to be exciting. They're seen here on training flight. One of the things a lot of people doesn't know about the Tuskegee Airmen and their experience and accomplished is something called the Freeman Field Mutiny. Brad alluded to and talked about Jim Crow, okay, and how society was. Well, there was our Army Regulation 85-2 that stated that no recreational facilities would be segregated on any Army, Air Force, and military installation. Well, 162 officers of the 477 decided to challenge that because one commander wanted to segregate the facilities. He wanted a certain club for the blacks, certain club for the white officers. When in a sense, they knew that was illegal. So they staged basically a mutiny. Okay, they were ordered not to go to the clubs. They were ordered to only go to the black clubs. They went to the white clubs in groups of 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and ultimately were arrested. This is a photograph of those officers, 162 in total, that were arrested. They were held for court-martial and trial. The penalties for disobeying a lawful order in time of war was death. Where they were arrested at and where they were gathered up and fenced in with armed guards on that same base were German POWs and Italian POWs that were not guarded, had the freedoms that they didn't even have. Okay, once again, the Tuskegee Airmen just weren't made up of the pilots. You had the enlisted men, and they had training too, and they took their training seriously. Here you see one disassembling or assembling a 50 caliber machine gun blindfolded. And once again, this is the Tuskegee base, B-25, right there at Tuskegee. Right in the background, you see the little planes with the red tails. Those are AT-10s. In 20-minute advanced training, they flew the little AT-10s and moved right on up to the B-25. It's a typical B-25 crew. Consists of pilot, co-pilot, a dual-rated navigator bombardier, radio operator, tail gunner, and a waist gunner. And what can I say? Fighter pilots will be fighter pilots. I just had to throw that one in, okay? In 1947, the 477th Bomb Group, or Composite Group, was deactivated, and the 332nd Fighter Wing was reactivated, okay? And it was reactivated flying the P-47N, okay? Now, what's significant about that in itself is that the Air National Guard units were flying P-51 Mustangs. Yet you have an active fighter wing flying pretty much obsolete aircraft. P-47N Thunderbolt out of Lockbourne Army Air Base. It's Captain Walter Downs. Picture him taken at Lockbourne, 1948. What are the Tuskegee Airmen? Tuskegee Airmen is any man or woman, black or white, that served in any capacity in any unit stemming from the Tuskegee experience. A lot of folks don't know that. Photograph P-47N, Lockburn, Army Air Base, 1948. Typical flight planning mission, briefing, looks pretty informal, but I'm pretty certain it was pretty serious. A group of pilots stateside on their way out to the aircraft. Something that's has not been publicized a lot in their history is what they accomplished right towards the end of their existence. In 1948, the Air Force decided to have its first annual fighter gunnery meet to be held at Nellis Air Force Base. Today, the Navy has the same thing. It's called Top Gun. The Air Force has it today. It's called Red Flag. In that event, you had conventional fighter aircraft, and you had jet fighter aircraft, and you had squadrons. You had a team from each group, whether it's conventional or jets. These four guys here were members of that team. Lieutenant Harry Stewart, who had already shot down 3 German aircraft overseas, Alva Temple, James Harvey, and Halbert Alexander, who was an alternate pilot. These men were chosen to represent the 332nd Fighter Group. In the course of the event, one Tuskegee Airman was killed flying as a passenger in an F-82. These men here won that event. A very unknown history. Color slide, James Harvey getting into his P-47 taken there at the event. After the event was over, they held a banquet at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, which was segregated. They were awarded the trophy. They took the trophy back to their base, which would only remain open for another month because the Air Force was already in the process of integration. Once the Air Force integrated, the trophy disappeared. Nobody knew where the trophy was until 1995. Also of note, as time went on and this event was held over and over, there was never no mention of who won the first event. It got to a point where it was just winner, 1949, unknown. No, it was known, just didn't want to be told. Now I'm here to tell you that the trophy has been relocated. It is on display at the Air Force Museum at Dayton, Ohio.
And some history there that needs to be shared. In 1995, I was involved in competitive aerobatic flying. I was flying a super decathlon in Texas. Then I started flying a Pitts S2B in competition, and then later on an extra 300. And I made the 1999 advanced U.S. team and competed in the Czech Republic at the World Championships. At that time, there was a gentleman, Phil Shaft, from Minnesota, South St. Paul, Minnesota, who was involved with an organization called the Commemorative Air Force. Now, for those of you who don't know, and anyone can join the Commemorative Air Force, it consists of a group of volunteers operating and supporting World War II aircraft. The home base is in Midland, Odessa, Texas. The Commemorative Air Force was formerly the Confederate Air Force. And for all those who wonder, the Confederate Air Force is dead, and the personnel basically have changed their attitudes and changed the structure of the organization to be inclusive, whereas before they were exclusive. And that also is on a generational level. I thought a great way of preserving the history of men like Brigadier General Mike McCarthy and my father's history was to stop what I was doing and join the Commemorative Air Force. I always thought it'd be great to fly fighters. My friend Phil Shaft was flying a B-25 in Minnesota with the South St. Paul wing. The Commemorative Air Force has many wings around the United States and also the world. There are probably 11,000 members worldwide, over 70 wings. The particular group in Minnesota had access to a P-51C model Mustang. Now remember, the C model is the rare Razorback version, like Scott's C model here. Thanks, Scott, for bringing the aircraft here. The D model has a bubble canopy for increased visibility. The southern Minnesota wing was restoring this aircraft, had no funds until Don Hines who was the project leader at the time, came on board. He was enamored with the history of the airmen and how they overcame so much adversity in the past and how very few people knew about the story. And he thought, what a great universal story to have, not just for blacks, but just for everyone to say, hey, listen, if these guys could do it, as I said earlier, anyone can do it through dedication of purpose, persistence, determination. And so I thought, you know, if I have an opportunity to tell a story and reach out to others because I'm getting out of an aircraft that looks like the Tuskegee Airmen's group, I think that is a great opportunity to expand one's horizon and influence others, because the greatest generation has a story that just cannot be diminished and should not fall away from the history books. And that's why I decided to join the Southern Minnesota Wing and became a part of this restoration effort called the Red Tail Project. Now, the aircraft that we restored back in 2001, as I said, was an effort of volunteers. It was essentially a vocational training tool at a Bozeman State College. They were going to get rid of the aircraft for scrap heap and give it to the scrap heap until someone said from the wing, hey, we can restore this because we can use this Mustang with our B-25. And in telling the story of the B-25 in the restoration, they found out that it was escorted by the Tuskegee Airmen. So that changed perspective on, hey, listen, this story has some synergy. We can have a B-25, we have a C model Mustang in Tuskegee colors escorting the B-25. Who's in favor? Everybody in Minnesota raised their hands at the wing. And I thought, hey, great, all the airmen are getting older, and unless I get involved in this, I'll be 80 years old and it will never have been done. And so I dropped what I was doing with the competitive aerobatics. I took out a second mortgage on the house, bought the T6, and dedicated the past 10 years to getting involved with the P-51C to keep the history alive of my dad's group. Now, unfortunately, in 2004, our project leader, Don Hines, had a catastrophic engine failure and was killed in a crash at an air show at Red Wing, Minnesota. I was there when the crash happened. The airplane was completely destroyed. We did a press conference at the time. We thought basically that the aircraft was done. I lost a good friend in the accident. His wife was there, one of his kids was there. We were just devastated. And then while we were giving the press conference, a restoration person named Jerry Beck said, guys, all is not lost. We want to take all the pieces, and when you're ready, I can restore this aircraft. It's going to take a lot of money. You're going to have to go out and fundraise, but it is possible to refabricate and take some of the old parts, get a lot of new parts, and have the aircraft flying again. And we were all in shock. We just thought it couldn't be done. And Jerry Beck said, you know, I've restored worse. Well, we basically thought, well, let's go out and ask the family of Don Hines first. So we approached the Hines family just after Pat's husband was killed in the aircraft, and I might say just after, within a year, and we broached the subject, and she said, you know, Don would be extremely upset if you guys and gals didn't go out there and try to make that dream happen, to tell the story about the Tuskegee Airmen. And in fact, Don had wanted me to fly the aircraft back in 2004. I was actually getting checked out in the aircraft the night prior to the crash. So it was probably making metal when I was flying the aircraft with Doug Rosendahl. So that being said, I'm going to show you a slide of what the aircraft looked like after the crash in the backyard of a neighborhood so that you get a perspective on where we came from to where we are today. You can see in this crash, this is maybe about 5 or 10 minutes after the crash, the devastation. And remember, my good friend Don Hines lost his life in this crash. So from here, what I want to show you is the DVD that we have on what actually was involved in getting the aircraft back up and flying.
It has been 5 long years since the accident that destroyed the Red Tail and claimed Don Hines' life. Once again, this Mustang is prepped for flight by the restorers of Tri-State.
Well, it's evolved over the years, but primarily now it works on and restores and builds parts for World War II airplanes, namely the P-51 Mustang.
Don had the idea and the funding behind it, and it was Jerry's shop, and it's like, okay, we have this airplane to build, let's build it.
Finished components, painted parts, and refurbished systems are now finally coming together. For 3 years, steady progress was made on restoring the aircraft. Then tragedy struck the project once again.
2 years ago, Beck was participating in an air show activity and was killed there. And he was flying his A model Mustang, which was, pretty near and dear to him.
After the accident, the question is, well, what's going to happen to Tri-State Aviation? And it's like, well, we have to continue on.
We're still here. The capabilities are still here. The vision that he had is, I think, with us. I think we hold that yet. And so that helped in moving forward with the CAF project as well, with the Red Tail. And it really, that project is so huge that it's just been probably an honor for all of us to be part of that.
Tri-State pressed on to complete the Mustang, along with the help of Red Tail Project volunteers.
Yeah, I've got a pretty good crew. We don't really have an exact count. There's 5 or 6 guys that are kind of my key guys, kind of the main guys that have come up here on a regular basis, and it's been a great help with the project. The thing that I like about it the most, though, too, it's kind of a learning experience. These are the guys that are going to help maintain the airplane once it's flying, and to get the experience of working with the airplane and being all the way down to the minute detail of it to understand how the systems work is I think, going to be a great value to the wing down there to have those people.
As the first flight date nears, the focus and work intensify.
It's hard to focus on a project and to get it to the finish, and the excitement builds and everybody wants to see it fly, and we get a lot of people come in to want to see how the project's coming. They want to be here to see it fly. Jerry's thought was always, well, we're going to sneak it out the back door and we're going to fly it once, and then we're going to call them up and say, okay, we're ready to fly. Well, we didn't get that luxury this time, and it gets a little tense when you're trying to finish the last details, and there's things you have to concentrate on and do it just right. And when you have a whole bunch of people standing over you, looking at you, questioning whether you're going to be able to do it right or not, it kind of wears on a person, and tempers get a little short. But
among the crowd of visitors, a guest with a special connection to the project has arrived.
I was amazed to see Ben Hines. I'd heard that he was coming, and when he walked into the shop, I was just elated to see him.
Marine Captain Ben Hines, son of Don Hines, has come to see his father's dream once again take flight.
To me, that was huge. It made for myself personally, it made it more of a, you know, somewhat of a true mission accomplished.
After a long restoration road, it is finally time to do some flying.
Wapana traffic, Mustang 61429, departing runway 15 Wapana.
You know, it continues. This airplane is nicer than it was last time. That's an incredible testament to Tri-State, to Beck, to Cindy, to all the people that Beck chose to be part of his team here.
You know, I mean, and it's exciting for me too, of course. I mean, it's kind of one of those you like to see the project through and see it get done and get it out there so people can enjoy it.
It was pretty spontaneously amazing and exhilarating, and those that have experienced a child coming into the world, I'm sure that you could equate it to that. And it was absolutely beautiful.
It's bittersweet in a way. The plane took on, it's a story larger than itself. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen, the story that the project wants to tell, it's almost expanded beyond the airplane. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, was to be a part of that and to let the project know that we as a family are still supporting the story that they want to tell.
It's history, you know. Everybody forgets history. So if that airplane was restored like it is and put in a museum somewhere, the number of people that would get to see it would be really small. And when you actually get to see it fly, then everybody, wow, that's cool, you know, that's exciting.
I mean, this is not the end, this is the beginning. It's the beginning of a whole new phase, but it really is. This was not the goal. This is the beginning.
I'm just looking forward now to, now that the aircraft is flying and will be back in the air, is trying to put the whole project together, the Red Tail project, so that they can truly go out and accomplish their mission in telling about the Tuskegee Airmen and just the mission about what are you going to do with your life.
We can celebrate, rejoice, enjoy for a little while, but the real mission is to tell the story of the Tuskegee Airmen and to inspire young people to realize that they can be whatever they dream. And that's what Don set out to do. And so this is just the first step, albeit a big one, in a long journey. And knowing Don as I do, he's tapping me on the shoulder saying, okay, now let's get to work.
Today we try to give you the history of the airmen, the importance, and also the focus on using the airplane as an educational tool. I'm not interested in flying a Mustang just because I own a Mustang. It's the story that's important. And I will tell you this, had the airmen gotten into aviation with the Corsair in the Navy, Craig and I would be a lot closer and we'd be talking about the Corsair. But that being said, it's a privilege and an honor to go out and tell the story of how they overcame so much. And the next series of slides is a very proud moment from last year when we took the aircraft to Oshkosh in 2009. I gotten checked out in the aircraft about 3 days prior to flying to Oshkosh, so it was quite an honor. I'm quite respectful of all the airmen, including everybody who's been a service person back with the Greatest Generation for their effort in making us and keeping us free. But being at Oshkosh and having bomber pilots come up to us, turret gunners, who were escorted by the airmen, and they have tears in their eyes and they're saying basically, without these guys, I wouldn't have a family. And that really touches your heart. This is the assembly prior to Oshkosh. And this is at Tri-State Aviation in Wappington, North Dakota. This is the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, which was the aircraft engine type for the Mustang. The aircraft, for all the modelers in here, is assembled just like a big RC aircraft. You've got the wing. When it's built, it's actually placed on a jig, and then you put the fuselage onto that wing, and there are 4 big bolts that hold the wing to the fuselage. It's kind of scary. The radiator is just below the number 4. We had to swing the gear, of course, but this is the process of mating the wing and the fuselage together. We rolled it out of Tri-State for the pictures. And we happened to have Joe Gomer, who was a Tuskegee pilot, at the ceremony for the rollout, and he's been an integral part of the Red Tail project. We tried to remain in contact and establish a relationship with the different chapters of Tuskegee around the country so that when we go to an event and we get the people's attention, the public's attention, we have airmen there for them to interact with. That's a group of volunteers. No one's paid. A lot of the guys drive 3 or 4 hours from Minneapolis up to Wappington to work on the aircraft on the weekends. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate, and we all appreciate them and their efforts in doing this. This is a Don Hines filter. When the aircraft came apart, or the engine came apart actually, it was making metal. This is essentially a chip detector designed by Jerry Beck so that if we're making metal in the future, a light comes on in the cockpit. That's Ben Hines with Joel Bile, one of our lead mechanics. Another shot. This is Odegaard. Mr. Odegaard is the person who assembled our wing, and he has a restoration facility about a half an hour from Jerry Beck's place. There aren't too many places where you can tie down an aircraft and run it up, but in Wappington, you can see, just use a fire hydrant. Okay. That's a great sound of the Merlin running. Again, all the parts have to be checked meticulously before we fly. First flight photo with Doug Rosendahl, our present project leader. Prior to Oshkosh, we hadn't even put the final details on the aircraft, and we were trying to get it ready, so we flew it and then finished painting it. It's a great shot. That's Doug again. We used a T6 for the camera ship. When we arrived in Oshkosh, we had a tremendous reception because people remembered it from 2001, 2002. And so we had a very, very successful press conference. That's about 4 days after I got checked out, and I was still pretty nervous. That's Colonel Charles McGee, and Charles McGee has the distinction of flying more combat missions of any Air Force pilot in our country. He flew the Mustang in World War II, the Mustang in Korea, and F-4s in Vietnam. Charles has been involved with the Red Tail Project since its inception, and he's been a great supporter of trying to get the interest in sponsors. Some more fans. We had quite a reception. It was great to see the enthusiasm from the crowd in supporting us. This is, I think, a landing with Doug in the aircraft. I may have been in the back seat. This is the reception back at its home base. The aircraft's home base is in South St. Paul at Fleming Field. Our project leader and myself, once again at Oshkosh, we are extremely elated with the reception and also the future for the aircraft. Steve Brown is the current president of the Commemorative Air Force, and he's the one who has changed the mindset and the operational aspects of the Commemorative Air Force. Working on this project has been, without a question, the highlight outside of marriage of what you can do in aviation. And it's very, very important that we try to pass this on to others. And as I said initially, when you see young people out there and they say, well, my life is so tough, you know, you hear a story like this and you see what these gentlemen and gals went through back in 1940, 1950, and you realize that, you know, things were a lot tougher back then. And to go through so much and to achieve so much with so little is really a quality that we should all try to emulate. And so I'm very thankful for having the influence of my father and getting involved with the historic aspect of flying. I remember flying on the MD-88 as a co-pilot in Dallas, and I had a captain who believed that women should not be flying airplanes, and it just so happened that the lead flight attendant's mother flew B-29s with the Wasps. And you're sitting there, and this guy's, you know, adamant about, oh no, women, they really should, you know, stay at home, blah, blah, blah. And the flight attendant just happened to have the current book from her mom. And she opens it up, and I look at the captain and go, what were you saying? You know, I think you misspoke. But the point is, there are a lot of great stories out there, and all we have to do is ask for people to tell us the stories and spread the stories out there. So I thank everyone for coming today.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.